next expert is Fahim Afghan from Egress. We look forward to your presentation, Fahim.
Well, good day, everyone, first and foremost. A real pleasure to be here. Very excited to be here, part of the agenda. I'm Fahim Afghan with Egress Software Technologies. If you're not familiar, we are leaders and specialists in intelligent email security and secure file sharing and collaboration. Headquartered in London, although we do have significant presence in North America, in Boston and Toronto as well. And like I say, delighted to be here speaking on what we feel is a new #1 risk to email security and how that requires, I guess, a new approach in terms of mitigating that risk. I think just sort of to set the background, even before this pandemic had struck, there was a growing sense, certainly within our community, that the threat to email security had changed. We think back a couple of decades ago where the focus was on implementing firewalls and multi-factor authentication, disk encryption. Then came the wave of anti-spam, anti-malware, data loss prevention became a topic of conversation. But I think it's fair to say that the spirit behind many, if not all of these approaches, was more geared towards keeping external intruders or threats at bay. However, of course, the way in which we operate has completely changed. Though we didn't need a pandemic to tell us that we are now more digitally connected than ever. And of course, that cloud has transformed great customer expectations of what great service looks like. But what we have learned in these past sort of 6 months is that remote working, to a significant extent, is likely here to stay for the foreseeable future. And as we as employees get caught up in this sort of 24/7, 365 working environment, we're working around the clock, we're becoming fatigued, rushing to send emails, often from a mobile device in any corner of the house or apartment in which we live. And it's all just dialing up the risk of a security incident happening. So if I can sort of just put things into perspective and give a sense of what we're dealing with here. This is data that we actually released just last week. So it's hot off the press, very excited to be sharing it with you today. It forms off the back of nearly 540 interviews with CISOs, IT leaders and the like from across industries based in the UK and North American regions. Although we commissioned it, I should point out that it was actually executed by an independent research firm called Arlington Research. And what we really wanted to do with this research was really understand how the new working environment, the new environment has impacted data protection efforts. Now, I won't read every single stat on the slide. Knock yourself out, have a read through the data points there. It's very interesting. But in terms of interpreting this data, I think there are two key conclusions that I certainly take on and I'd love to share with you. I think first and foremost, email as a communication channel, as that vector, usage has exploded once more. It is accelerating digital transformation efforts. If an organization wasn't already embarking on some form of digital transformation initiative before the pandemic struck, it's highly likely that they are now, because we are creating and sharing more digital data than we have ever before. I think there were pre-pandemic estimates that by 2024, 80% of a company's data would be unstructured. It's highly likely that that's accelerated now. I'd be intrigued to know what the timeline is for that particular sort of yardstick now. And secondly, email data breaches are still happening. Employees, through no fault of our own necessarily, are just becoming a little bit more careless in this environment when faced with distractions like children at home, pets, deliveries at the door, maybe even working longer hours to prove our sense of productivity. In that environment, we are sending emails to the wrong person or with the wrong content, often without the appropriate level of protection as well, even falling prey to what are now increasingly sophisticated phishing attacks. And it means that people are actually now becoming the dominant force behind many of the data breaches that we see today. Regulators are now publishing data, for example, the ICO in the UK, where human error and the fact that people are sending emails to the wrong person or with the wrong content is actually becoming the #1 reported incident to those regulators. So in sum, most breaches now are happening not necessarily because of a malicious attacker or due to someone intercepting the network. It's actually what we call these human activated threats from inside the business that are now putting sensitive data most at risk. So how do we manage this new wave of risk? Well, to date, the traditional approach has no doubt been to deploy policy-based technologies. And what they've done so well to date is, of course, scan the message body and attachments for keywords, and then trigger actions based on the presence of those keywords. So, for example, encrypting or not encrypting, or even blocking a message altogether. However, I was actually chatting with a group security director at a manufacturer. This was back in sort of January, February time, before any talk of a pandemic. And what was clear to him was that these traditional mechanisms that we've employed to date are actually unable to keep pace with this new wave, this new generation of human activated threat. Of course, we still saw a role for policy-based engines or solutions in email security. Nonetheless, we agreed that, number one, that they're just not intelligent enough to prevent many of the accidental or even malicious sends that we see today. So, for example, you could have a DLP rule that allows, say, Alice in company A to email Bob at company B, and you could even set a policy to detect and encrypt based on keywords contained within that email. But none of that actually helps if Alice accidentally emails the wrong Bob at company B. You know, the DLP rules won't specify which Bob it is that Alice is meant to be emailing with what data. And let's face it, I don't think any company has the resource to manually maintain rules at such a granular level. So in sum, there's a significant amount of risk that remains. Secondly, you know, there's a lot of noise due to unnecessary alerts, false positives, no doubt due to the static nature of the rules. And of course, that frustrates users. They don't want to use it. They look for workarounds. And if there's lower adoption, that impacts our ROI, not to mention creating additional risk of the rise in shadow IT and users and employees using far less secure mechanisms to do their job. And then finally, something we constantly hear is just the time spent managing and maintaining and updating those policy databases. It just gets in the way of productivity. In fact, someone mentioned to me the other day, these policy-based approaches are only as good as the people that can update them. So in sum, I think we're coming to realize that these legacy DLP approaches are I guess, being exposed as perhaps more one-size-fits-all approaches, lacking any kind of understanding of the relationships and interactions taking place. So I think there's a feeling as a result that technology needs to step up. And I think the good news is that it has. There have been some incredible advancements in data science that are now giving us new capabilities that can really plug the gaps and overlay some of these existing technologies to minimize that risk further. You know, I'm not a data scientist by trade, so I just want to manage expectations there. But I think about some of the advancements that are being made in such technology. You think about cloud and parallel processing, which are now allowing us to ingest and analyze vast amounts of data in a very short space of time. Graph databases that you'd associate in the mechanics of LinkedIn and Facebook are now allowing us to accurately model relationships and really understand how users interact with each other. And then finally, machine learning algorithms, you know, the likes of Bayesian inference, are allowing us to continuously update hypotheses as more information becomes available. So there's a whole heap of information that we can now understand and analyze in a far more efficient way to overlay some of the existing approaches that have some of those gaps that are still exposing us to significant levels of risk. And that's why, from our point of view, you know, in order to mitigate this new wave of human activated threat, this new wave of insider risk, we see an opportunity for organizations to really evolve the way we protect ourselves. I think, as I touched upon at the start, technology has traditionally played its part at the network edge to keep external intruders or threats at bay. However, human layer security is all about taking that new technology, that data science, that machine learning, and wrapping it around people so that we can understand that user at the individual level as a specific individual or person. So their emailing habits, who they communicate with, their relationships, the kind of content they share, the time at which they share that content, so that we can build context around that user and then assess the level of risk at the point at send. And it means that we can, first of all, spot any anomalies in that user's behavior, and then most importantly, fix and resolve a potentially costly security breach before it can even happen. So it's a completely new way of preventing data loss on email, where technology is really stepping up to the plate to negate some of the risks that we still have when it comes to the existing DLP policy-based approaches and one-size-fits-all models that we've employed to date. So I appreciate that that is a fairly high-level overview. So therefore, what I want to do is just share with you some stories that hopefully bring human layer security to life, demonstrate what it is in action, but hopefully also, more importantly, highlight its value to email security. So first and foremost, this was a Fortune 100 insurance company who came to us as they were suffering from misdirected emails. In fact, they told us that of the 500 or so email security incidents that they would report on average, 95% of those were actually down to users emailing the wrong person or with the wrong content. So significant issue there that they had to solve. So what they did is they took that human layered approach to their email security. They wrapped that data science, that machine learning technology around their people to deeply understand users, understand their behavior. And what that meant in practice was evaluating the recipients they were emailing, so the recipient name, recipient information, the domain they were emailing as well, looking for authenticity, looking for historical communications with those recipients, and then measuring the content of the email against those recipients. So the subject line, the message content, also the data buried inside an attachment as well, and even also accounting for a user's role within the organization as well, because I think we can safely sort of bet that someone in a senior position in corporate finance is likely sharing very different types of data to, say, someone in an entry-level position in sales or marketing. So it allowed the system allowed users sort of to create that context around themselves, around their user habits and behaviors, so that we could spot anomalies and in turn keep their sensitive data safe. And as it says there, within 3 months, they were able to report a 91% reduction in misdirected emails, in that human error and those accidental sends. And something anecdotally they told us, actually, on top of that, all the time they would have previously spent, whether it was a user checking or validating email details, and all the business spent in training and workshops and the like, a lot of that was no longer needed. So it gave a lot of time back to the business to focus on other priorities. So a real lever of that efficiency value there as well. Secondly, this was the story of an investment bank that came to us with a perhaps more complex scenario. So they needed to make sure confidential client data couldn't pass between their trading teams on one side of the business and their colleagues within the firm sitting in research. So in effect, here what we were talking about was an internal data breach. So what we did with them was overlay existing DLP rules and policies with the contextual machine learning so that we could scan the user's message content, again, including data inside attachment, measure it against the given recipients, and make sure that an information barrier wasn't breached. So therefore, there was no breaking confidentiality, there was no data leak, and of course, ultimately, the reputation of that business in the eye of their customers was upheld, and so too the revenues, no doubt, as well. So additional value there. And then finally, This was the story of an accountancy firm that we work with who were particularly concerned, similarly to the previous story, particularly concerned with putting sensitive client data on the line and damaging those relationships with those customers, not to mention the regulatory consequences as well. And they had experienced as well employees sending emails to the wrong gym or the wrong barber. They actually cited Outlook autocomplete as a sort of frenemy that made life easy, but perhaps too easy to make mistakes as well. So again, they took that more human-layered approach to email security, wrapped that technology around people to understand users at the individual level, detect abnormal behavior as a result. And not only did it help to stop those kinds of accidents from happening, but it did so in a way that required no effort on the part of the user. It all worked in the background as part of an Outlook plugin. It didn't change anything or require the user to do anything different at all. And actually, a great anecdote we heard from their data protection officer, their DPO, was that she was sort of standing in the communal area or the kitchen area of the office, and she and her colleagues could overhear peers within the business sort of whispering to each other saying, hey, I almost made a huge mistake, but the system saved me. What a relief. So first and foremost, great validation there. But in terms of a user engagement and a user experience point of view, I feel like we're really stepping away from that one size fits all policy based approach that can just get in the way and frustrate users, and getting to a place where it's about technology and people working hand in glove and empowering users at their level to spot those mistakes and stop them before they can even happen. So in conclusion, just to summarize what we've been talking about, I think it's fair to say that the threat to email security has evolved once again. What we're really focusing on now is this human activated threat, this risk from inside the business. And it's fair to say that the static DLP policy-based approach, while it has merit and has worked to a significant extent to date, it can't keep up with this new wave of threats. So technology needs to step up, and the good news is that it has. You know, the cynicism around concepts like AI and machine learning, from 3, 4, 5 years ago, we can feel more confident in the technology to do what it says it does, and that is, in our case, fix potentially costly security breaches before they can even happen. So if this has whet the appetite and it's something you'd like to know more about or like to explore further, if it's hopefully spark new ideas, but even if it's validated existing ideas, something we'd love to see you add and join us for is an event that we're hosting live tomorrow. It's our Human Layer Security Live event. We'll just be exploring what the human layer security concept is at a more deeper level. Talk about some of the humans behind the human layer, and most importantly, talk about what approaches we can take to mitigate that insider risk. So we've got some great speakers lined up to talk. So Eric O'Neill, former FBI agent, who's going to be telling some intriguing stories based on what he was telling us a couple of weeks ago. We've got Christian Toon, CISO at Pinsent Mason's international law firm. We've also got Lisa Forte, world-renowned authority on insider risk and the psychology behind the human activated threat. So it promises to be a very rewarding day of discussion and debate. So please join us for that. You still time to get your ticket for tomorrow. Otherwise, really appreciate your time today. We do have a booth if you'd like to chat or have more information or get a copy of that outbound email security report where I presented some of the stats at the beginning. Swing by our booth, get to know us, and we'll be happy to share that report with us. I also understand that there's a $250 Amazon voucher to be won via a raffle, so do swing by. I would love to take this conversation further and answer any questions you may have. But otherwise, again, a real pleasure to have been here today. Enjoy the rest of the event and stay healthy and stay safe. Take care.